So hello to everyone, both in person and online. It is lovely to see you in both places. If we haven't met before, I'm Emily Somerville. I am a program manager here in OITE. And I'm excited to talk to you today about presenting posters. I assume a lot of you are getting ready for Postback Poster Day in a month. So prepping your posters for that, want to know more about how to make it and just the practical advice of how you create this document, how do you print it, all those useful things. So what is a poster session? We need to talk about what this actually looks like. Have any of you presented a poster before or been to a poster session?
Yes.
I've been to a poster.
Fantastic. Even if you haven't presented, you've at least seen what it looks like. It often looks like this. It's a bunch of people mingling around in a large space. There's a lot of these boards set up all over the conference center. These are in Natcher, the main conference center where Postback Poster Day will be. And there's people standing at all of these posters talking about their science. This is a really unique way to talk about your science. It's not something you think about initially when you're used to presenting like in lab meetings or just talking to people in your group. But really poster sessions are one of the best ways that scientists have to talk to each other and really share their science with each other. It's a place to get everyone to mingle all in one space and learn about a bunch of different science that you may not know about before. I really enjoy poster sessions. I know they can be really chaotic. There's a lot going on at the same time, but it's also really exciting to hear advice and feedback from people. When I was a grad student or a postdoc, I know I was always really excited to get back into the lab after going to a poster session and hearing advice and feedback from other people. My background as well, so I have a PhD in cancer biology and was a postdoc for a couple of years at NCI as well before coming to OITE. So I have made a lot of posters in my scientific lifetime. They're the bread and butter of how we communicate with each other. This was my very first poster. So way back in undergrad, I did a summer internship at Emory University. This is my very first poster. So my experiences with making posters and talking about them goes way back. So why present a poster? Why might you actually make a poster beyond just showing off your research and that's it? Posters really do allow you to share your findings with people outside of your lab, outside of your department, and get that exposure to the wider scientific field. And it's great practice for you as well, learning to talk about your science with people you don't normally talk to about it. In the lab, it's really easy to get stuck in sort of using the language that you use with people who are experts in that topic. You have your own shorthand for everything, your own abbreviations. As soon as you start talking about the topic, you all know the background inside and out. But at poster sessions and other public presentations like this, you're talking to people who are experts in something entirely different. They don't know your scientific background. So it's great practice learning to talk about science with people who are not experts in your particular topic. It's also great to get feedback from people, like I've mentioned. This is a great way to hear suggestions for what should the next experiments be? How can I change the controls on this? What sort of other antibodies or other assays could I use to address the same question? Other people will have those ideas, and they're often really excited to talk to you about that and give feedback on it. These sessions are also great for networking as well, not just for getting scientific advice, but meeting other people in your field, gaining new contacts, and people who you may rely on throughout your career. In grad school, the very specific protein I was working on, it's called myosin 10. I presented at a cell biology conference and happened to find the one guy who was the expert in this protein. Had a great conversation with him, chatted for about 45 minutes, and we wound up communicating back and forth throughout my dissertation, getting advice from him about this one protein. So just presenting at a poster session allowed me to make that connection that I wouldn't have had before. I absolutely have heard stories as well of people getting connections to set up collaborations later or even finding job opportunities, especially as you're in grad school, starting to go to your next steps, whether it's a postdoc or another job. Presenting at big national conferences as a grad student or a postdoc in particular is a great way to find exposure to job opportunities and your next steps. So before you even get to the poster, there's some basic information that applies to any sort of event, not just Postback Poster Day. Always look at the instructions they provide for that event. Any conference, any symposium will give you the dimensions of what your poster should be. They should tell you the orientation of your poster. I recently had to make a vertical poster for the first time, and it was very strange. I'm so used to making horizontal posters, but everything shifted to vertical for this one presentation. They'll also tell you how you're going to attach your poster. So do they provide push pins? Do they provide masking tape? What sort of supplies are they going to have to just physically attach your poster to the board? Importantly, they'll also tell you both a display time and a presentation time, which are not the same. You'll often put up your poster several hours or even a day before you actually present it. Oftentimes at bigger meetings, there's a lot of sessions back and forth, and so they'll give you time at the beginning of the day to set up, just put up your board, go to other things happening at that meeting, and then present your poster later on. So just pay attention to the display time and the presentation time, because they're not necessarily the same. For those of you getting ready for Post-Fact Poster Day specifically, we have some more specific details for you. So at Post-Fact Poster Day, the poster boards themselves are 72 inches wide by 48 inches tall, but we recommend that you print your poster at 48 inches wide and 36 inches tall. This is basically the most standard poster size you're going to see. And the reason why is almost every poster printer has a maximum width they can print of 36 inches. So it's risky trying to make a design that is taller than 36 inches because you can't go taller than that on the shortest dimension. So that's what we recommend, 48 by 36. Our poster presentation boards are horizontal, so make a horizontal poster. And we will have push pins. There'll be push pins everywhere, so don't worry, we will have plenty for you. Same thing as well, we'll tell you your assigned presentation time in advance. The amount of time we have between sessions at Post-Fact Poster Day is really short, so you only set up your poster like 15 to 30 minutes before you present. So you don't have to get there super early. It's just right before your actual session time. But important that you do set up early and you take down your poster at the end of your session so we can turn it over for the next group of presenters after you. So that's just basics for what you need to know for posters in general. But really the meat of what I want to talk about today is what goes into your poster. How do you decide the info to put inside of it? How do you design it in a way that's really going to get your science across to the audience? So what is a poster? How do we sum it up? In a way, it's sort of like marketing your science to other people. It is a concise, a short, visually appealing illustration of what you do. And both of those factors are really important, making sure that it's both short enough, doesn't have too much detail so that people can actually digest it quickly and move on to the next poster. And you also want it to be an attractive looking poster. You want it to catch people's attention and want them to come talk to you about it. So simply having a good design in the poster can make a huge difference in the amount of traffic you get at your poster and the number of people who want to talk to you about your science. It tells you the basics of what you've done. What science are you doing? What questions are you addressing in the field? You want to tell people how you did it. So getting into the methods, getting into those big research questions. Really importantly, one factor that a lot of people forget to include is why did you do this work? Or why do we care about this project? Again, as scientists, we're all experts in something technical. We all know our methods inside and out, but it's easy to forget the big picture. Why do we do what we do? So don't forget to bring it back to human health. How does it connect to other people? The great thing about working at NIH is all research here connects back to human health in some way, shape, or form. Even if you're in the most basic research lab, I promise you there is some way that what you do connects to human health. And you don't have to have super detailed reasons, but what we do in this genomics lab is learning about these rare variants. We're going to apply what we learn here to how cancer develops or how we diagnose certain genetic disorders. So find something broad that your work can relate to. And simply having that little human connection will make people interested in your project, even if they have no idea what the technical side of your project is. So this is an example of a poster that I made in grad school. There's a lot going on here. You'll see I noticed the poster should be concise and visually appealing. I think I did pretty well with the visually appealing. It's colorful. There's a lot going on here. But as I'll talk about posters and how I'll design it now, if I went back and redid this poster, I would do a lot of things differently because this is not concise. There is a lot of stuff going on here. Keep in mind too, this is a poster from grad school, so this is roughly 4 or 5 years of work crammed onto one poster For Post-Bac Poster Day, you don't have 5 years of work. That is okay. Don't expect this amount of data. But I just wanted to show you an example of what a poster that I've designed looks like, and sort of walk you through how we could change this to have a better design poster now. So general poster layout, scientists, we're creatures of habit. We like seeing the same thing in the same place every time. So your typical poster is going to have a very familiar layout. The poster title and all of the people related to it, all the affiliations go at the top, across that top bar of the poster. Underneath it, you'll see a series of columns. We always put our information on posters from top to bottom, left to right, just like you would be reading any other document. So you start with your introduction in the top left corner. A lot of people will include a separate box for the goals or hypothesis. So including, a little call out box or something just to make that really easy and obvious to find. Some people just include your hypothesis within the introduction. Moving on to methods, you want to tell people how you did your work, but importantly, not getting stuck in the weeds. And I'll talk more about that later too. Yes, it's the methods telling people how you do it, but they don't need to know every single detail for a poster. After that, you arrange your data in some sort of way that makes sense. There's all sorts of ways you can arrange this, but it's chunks of your data telling people a story about your work. Key thing here, I'll mention this multiple times as well. Not every piece of data belongs on the poster. You do not need to include every single blot you've done, every single analysis you've done. It's too much information for one poster. So you're really selecting the data that tells you a complete story the best. You'll wrap it up with conclusions, summarizing what you told people on the poster. This is a great place for some sort of visual representation, using something like BioRender or BioArt to make a visual, graphic representation of what you do. Briefly telling people about future projects, 2 or 3 ideas for what would be next. Wrapping up with acknowledgements for any people or resources that need to be acknowledged. And that is your basic poster layout. It's going to look very similar in pretty much any poster that you see. Again, the typical parts that people expect to see, starting with the title, the authors who's related to it, going through all of these sections here. These sections, as they're listed up here, where else might you see pretty much these exact same sections? What sort of format does this remind you of?
A paper.
A paper. Yep, 100%. It is the exact same stuff you would see in a paper. It's just a much more summarized version of it on a poster. Cursor is doing weird stuff. There we go. One thing that I don't list here that certain presentations will include, certain ones won't, is if you include your whole abstract on the poster. There's very divided opinions from people on if you include the abstract or not. I am of the opinion I do not like having the full abstract because it is a whole block of text on there. And it is really hard reading an entire paragraph when you want to just quickly digest information out of poster. So I much prefer if people have a summarized version of their introduction using bullet points, using short phrases. You do not need to copy paste your entire abstract on there. Yes, it's more work to make a more summarized version, but it's also much more digestible for people coming to your poster. But that being said, some conferences do ask you to include the whole abstract, so just pay attention to that meeting, and if they ask you for it, then you can copy paste your abstract. Deciding what goes into your poster. The big thing here is you always need to talk to your PI before deciding what data goes onto a poster. Especially at NIH, there are intellectual property considerations going into presenting your work, especially outside of NIH. Even here at NIH, for something like Post-Bac Poster Day, absolutely talk to your PI first about what data you're going to present on. But especially for outside conferences, you have to have PI approval first before presenting any data. They may tell you don't present certain bits of information, don't show certain data until it's ready, or hide certain gene names. That's actually very common to do. Like, this is gene A, but not actually spelling out what it is. Very normal to see in a poster presentation. But always talk to your PI first to decide that before designing your poster. Otherwise, you're going to have to undo a bunch of stuff and reprint a poster, and that's too much work. Decide in advance what you want your take-home message to be. If you go into this knowing what you want your couple bullet points are that you want people to emphasize and to remember when they walk away from your poster, have those couple main points in mind from the start. Again, you're telling people a story. You're not just regurgitating a list of methods at them. You want them to understand the story of here's where I started, here's the big picture of my work, here's the details that we found in big picture conclusions, how this applies to the field. Less is more is absolutely the key here for a poster. You don't need everything on here. You don't need all of the information, and you don't need to list out, the entire contents of the paper on your poster. I think the hardest part of the entire poster is the title. It's, the same reason why making a poster is hard. You're trying to summarize multiple years of work to one piece of paper. The title is the most summarized version of that. You're taking all of your work and condensing it to essentially one sentence. You do want the title to sort of be a spoiler in a way. You want it to give away what you're doing. So don't worry about making, like puns or like huge titles. They're fun, but like you still need to tell people what you're doing and what the main conclusions are in the title. So get to the point, tell people what the purpose of the study is, the main finding of it. The title needs to be big enough as well that people standing, 6, 10, 15 feet away can stand there, look down the aisle and see your poster, read the title and know that that's a poster that they want to go see and go talk to you about and learn more about. So the title should be visible from a pretty far distance. I'll have recommendations for font sizes as well, so you know just how big that'll be. Again, this is really what a lot of people are going to use to decide whether they want to stop and talk to you, is they will read the title and they will just glance at your poster and see if it looks visually interesting, or if it's a topic that they want to learn more about. So simply having a good title makes a huge difference in people wanting to come talk to you further. After that, another basic session is just the authors and affiliations. You need the first and last name of the authors contributing to the poster. Unlike a paper, it doesn't have to be every single co-author who contributed to the entire project. You don't need 20, 30 people on the poster. It's really the people who contributed to the data on that poster. So who helped design it, who helped analyze it. It may just be you and your PI. It may be you, your PI, and a couple other lab members. Maybe you work with another postdoc or a staff scientist. It's the people who contributed to the work on that poster who need to be recognized. Same order as a paper, so the person presenting is always the first author, in descending order of how much work they did after that, and your PI is last, the senior author is last. If there are acronyms in here, spell out all of those acronyms. We really like the alphabet soup here at NIH. We have acronyms for absolutely everything, but anything longer than just NIH needs to be spelled out because people will not recognize the acronyms. Even your IC, absolutely, I would spell those out on the poster. You don't need to include street addresses. I think this is more of an old school thing. People used to include like the address of where it is. Absolutely no need for that. You can include just the city and the state if you want to. So, NIH, Bethesda, Maryland, that would be fine. But you don't even really need to include the city and state for a poster. Just the institution alone is just fine for a poster. Font size for affiliations, it's smaller than the title, but again, still visible from about 6 feet away. So if someone is standing there reading your poster, they can see your names without having to get up really close to see them. Logos are also really helpful here in the top title bar. They can add value to it, but only if you have 1 or 2 logos. You do not need to have more than that. More than 2 logos, it starts to look really cluttered and doesn't really add anything to the poster. So it's really common to include just like the basic NIH logo in the top corner. If your IC has a logo that is different than that, you could include it, but honestly, just the NIH logo itself would be fine. For anyone who is a grad student or at an academic institution, this could be just your institution's logo. Anyone who is a grad student here at NIH, that could be NIH and your university logo in GPP. But that's it. You do not need more than 2 logos on any poster. So getting into more parts, the introduction is where it all starts. This is what's going to catch people's attention. They've stopped, they've looked at your poster, they've read the title, they're like, ooh, this is, a kind of work that I want to learn more about. This is an HIV immunity poster. I want to learn more about this topic. Now they're going to get into the introduction and read about your project specifically. You want to provide enough background that someone who's not an expert in your project can understand it. If you're using a model system that's not, fairly common, you want to sort of justify that model system as well. So like cell culture, that's pretty common. If you're using any sort of animal model, if you're using anything like patient samples, you need to tell a little bit about the clinical trials they're from. It's really justifying the kinds of methods you're using to address these questions. A lot of people will end this here with just a clear statement of the hypothesis or the research goals. Again, some people just include it as the end of the introduction, or you can make a separate call-out box that specifically says hypothesis or research goals, put it in that box, and then continue with the methods after that. Keeping it brief is key, so use bullet points here. You do not need to type out a whole paragraph. If you can fit in a graphical representation of things, fantastic. Pictures are always your friends. So if there's any way to fit a picture in, do that instead of just having a paragraph of text. Methods, same thing as well. I think one of the biggest pitfalls in posters is people try to put in way too many details about the methods. Most audience members, completely honest, they do not care about the details of the methods. If they do, they will ask you questions about it. So if it is someone who does something similar to you and really wants to learn more about the methods, or wants to apply something similar to their work, they will then ask follow-up questions to ask more about the methods, but you do not need to tell them the whole process from beginning to end. Again, a fantastic place for graphical abstracts. So if you can draw out what you're doing using something like BioRender or other sort of like graphical representations, that's a great way to put a lot of details of the methods on there without having a lot of words. Anything that's a really basic method, so like, Western blots, qPCR, methods that you see over and over again, absolutely do not need to tell people how those work. You can just sort of understand that most people will know those methods. And if they don't, they'll ask you questions and you can add more details then. But yeah, don't go into details about basic methods. Getting into the data, deciding what data you want to include. Again, really, you just want the key figures. You do not need every piece of data you've ever produced. Like anyone who's ever done Western blots, we all know we have a binder full of failed Western blots that show absolutely nothing. Those don't go on here. You pick one representative blot and maybe a bar graph to summarize the results from a few different blots. It's again picking up one representative piece of data and showing that to sort of represent a larger body of work. Figures, I think it's really helpful to have a title for that section that summarizes the findings. So the same way if you were presenting your data in a talk, at a lab meeting or at another meeting with your department, if you're designing a slide telling about your data, you would have a sentence, a title for that slide that really summarizes what that slide is telling you about. The same thing is really helpful here for figures. So if you have, instead of just figure 1 and then start putting the data, if you have figure 1, this protein is overexpressed in lung cancer. Have that as the start, and it summarizes what the findings are so that people can, again, quickly digest what you're telling them. Mm-hmm. Another really common pitfall is making the font way too small on your figures in legends, especially on graph axes. It's very, very easy to forget to make that font much bigger. I'll send a resource after this as well, telling you how you can test print parts of your posters at the scale size to see how big stuff is. Highly recommend that if you have any sorts of graphs with small text on it, you print out just those parts of the poster to scale so you can see if the font is big enough to read from a distance. Another important thing to keep in mind is that your figure should make sense even if you're not there to talk about it. At Postback Poster Day, you're going to be there basically the whole time. You set up your poster, and a few minutes later, the session starts. But if you're going to a presentation at a larger conference, super common to put up your poster in the morning, and then you go and do other stuff for a few hours, come back and talk about it. But if people are wandering around the hall, they may have time to view the poster without you there to explain it. So a good poster should still have enough information that they can digest what kind of experiment this is, how do you read this graph, without having a massive legend having to spell everything out. After you go through your data, again, you want to have a conclusion section, and using bullet points here instead of a paragraph of text is the way to go. So summarize things in short little bits. Visual models, want graphics everywhere. Pictures are your friend on the poster. Less is more here, so don't have too much information. You don't have to summarize every single bit of information earlier. It's again just the key highlights that you want people to take away. There's that small, 3 or 4 important things that you have on the poster that you want people to remember after they walk away from your poster. There's a couple more sections that are optional depending on what you want to talk about, but I think they're useful to include in most cases. So future directions, I really like having future directions on a poster. This does not have to be a lot of experiments. You just need 2 or 3 ideas for what the next steps could be. And you can, again, just use bullet points, just use a short, fragment of a sentence, not even a full sentence of what that experiment will be. You're doing in vitro studies and next steps will be an in vivo mouse model to see how that applies. Expanding the cohort from looking at 5 patient samples to looking at 20. Whatever it is, just mentioning briefly what the next steps will be. After that, acknowledgements. Acknowledgements on a poster are really short. This is not the kind of acknowledgements you see in a talk where it's listing every person who's ever contributed to it. For a poster, we really care about funding sources and core resources. That's who you want to mention. So for NH, funding is pretty standard. All your funding is here, so you don't have to include like separate grants. Yeah. But for extramural sources, absolutely any funding that your PI has, any funding that you're on, if you're on a training grant, or like an F award or K award, absolutely list those. So this is the funding sources and other resources that contribute to the research that you did. References are optional. And this, I personally am not a fan of including a lot of references on posters. I think it takes up a lot of valuable space that you could be using for your own data. If you do have references, make it the really abbreviated version of the reference, just using the DOI. Don't include all of the references for your project. This is just if you have a couple key papers that you cited, say, in your introduction or in your methods. Like this paper is really important for understanding the method we use, then you would cite it on the poster. On the poster, pretty much everything should be readable from a few feet away, except for the references. This is the one place you can get away with having really tiny font, and that is okay. Basically, it is on the poster, you put it there, but it doesn't have to be readable from far away. So if you're going to have small font anywhere, it's just that references section. But again, really limit it. If you do have references, just the handful of references that are critical to the information you talked about. You don't need every reference that you've used leading up to this point in your project. Like I mentioned earlier, super important reminder again, talk to your PI before adding any data to any presentation. You may not think it's a big deal to include a certain piece of information, but there's always concern about other groups scooping you. So if someone talks about part of your project, they learn about it, they follow up in the studies before you're ready to publish. So that is one consideration, is other groups scooping you. And again, the other one is intellectual property. So once you present something, that the rights of the data change depending on where you are and how you're presenting. It may make it harder to publish later if you've already made certain pieces of information public. So when you go to publish things, it'll be harder to get it published if certain bits of information are shared. Your PI will be the expert on what can be shared and what cannot. So make sure to just have that dialogue with your PI. They're the best person to talk to about deciding what information to include and what information to hold back for now. But generally, you want data that is close to publication ready is ideal. It is stuff that is going to be published in the very near future so that it will be out in a publication soon. So with all of this information you have to cram onto a poster, how do you make sure that people pay attention to the important parts? How do you have it so that your message actually sticks with the audience? And emphasizing that it's really getting it down to just a small number of key points. Most people, when they stop and talk to you at a poster, they're going to be there for about 5 minutes. So you have about 5 minutes to summarize everything you've done, convey the story to them, which means you don't have time to go into every little detail you have, every bit of data. It's knowing those main key takeaway points that you want them to know later. A sort of similar format to think about. So tomorrow, actually, we have our post-bac seminar series. Every month, post-bacs present their research. Normally they're longer 15-minute talks, but tomorrow they're actually what's called a 3-minute thesis style. So it's a short 3-minute talk. You get one slide and talk about your research in 3 minutes. It's sort of a similar way of thinking about a poster that way. You'd have just a few minutes to summarize everything up. You want to include enough context for people to follow the story along, but not so much that they lose interest, get bored, and walk away from your poster. And it's important to remember too that with any good poster presentation, it's really a dialogue. It's not standing at a podium and talking to someone like it would be a more formal research presentation. You're talking to an actual person. And so they can ask you questions. You can ask them questions as well to see if you want to know what their background is. But really it's talking to someone. And so how you talk about the data and present it changes because of that. Another really helpful thing to keep in mind while designing your poster is keeping it visually interesting and easy to read. Again, people have just a few minutes, so you want them to be able to get through the information quickly. And having a poster that just looks pretty from a distance, as silly as it sounds to make a poster that looks pretty, it does really help in just grabbing people's attention. And that's all you need is enough time for them to look, see if it's a topic they want to learn more about, start reading more of the details, come up, talk to you, you start that Q&A dialogue going. So another helpful thing to keep in mind for posters is knowing your audience. It makes a huge difference how you talk about your science. If you're talking about it with your lab members, with people in your branch, people who are experts in that topic, or think about how you would take your work and explain it to your grandma at Thanksgiving, or how would you explain it to a middle school classroom if you went there. The way you talk about your science to experts versus non-experts is totally different. And the same thing applies to the poster presentations. At Postback Poster Day, it will mostly be scientists here at NIH, but there may be some friends and family who come as well. So there may be outsiders who are not scientists. So how to sort of decide that is you can think about as you go through your poster, if I was not an expert in this topic, what concepts do I mention? What terms do I mention that may not be recognizable to people outside of my lab? What sort of visual aids can I use to make this easier to understand? So what pictures can I include instead of a wall of text? And again, focusing on those key take-home points. But really the best way to learn what your audience, what their specialty is, how much science they know, is you get to ask them.
Yeah.
This is a fully acceptable thing, and in fact, I think a great thing to do. So when you're talking to someone at your poster, ask them, what is your scientific background? What do you study? And they'll tell you, just a sentence about what they do. If it's a similar field, great. So like if I was talking to someone else who is in cancer biology, I would know, fantastic. You're probably going to know a lot of the terms I'm going to talk about. I can go into a little more technical detail and you'll be able to follow along. But if I'm talking to someone and they're like, I am an environmental scientist, I look at evolution of these species and environmental toxins and how they respond, I'm like, oh, this is completely different science than me. I need to change how I talk about it and be less technical and have more big picture so that we can understand each other during this conversation because our specialties are totally different. So same thing, you can ask people when they come to your poster, what their background is. And just having that in mind will help you know how much detail to go into. So earlier in the presentation, I showed you a poster that I made in grad school. This is a slight variation of that same work I was doing in grad school. But I want to show you sort of how I redid this poster for two completely different audiences and how that changed. I talked about the science. So this first version here, I presented this at a national conference for cell biology. Same thing you saw with my first poster. It's a lot of data. There's a lot of information here. It gets very technical. However, I also presented the same project to a middle school science outreach program in something called a Flip Science Fair. So the scientists were presenting our posters to these middle schoolers and they were judging us on how our presentation was going. Which is really the opposite of when you go to science fairs. But it was a really cool exercise because I, as a grad student, had to think, how do I explain DNA methylation and epigenetic changes to a 7th grader who has not studied this before? So I really simplified the amount of information in here, backed off on the details. You'll see from poster 1 to poster 2, it's like 25% of the data. For your poster presentations at scientific conferences, you're not scaling back this much, but it's just an interesting exercise to think about. If you were to present your work to a middle school classroom, how would you do it? Completely different style of talking about your science. So that was sort of thinking about like the philosophy behind your poster, how you choose the information to go into it, how you decide what data to pick. But there's also a lot of really practical stuff that's just useful to know for making a pretty poster that I want to go into here. So how you design the actual poster layout. And how I think about this is a lesson that my undergraduate biochemistry professor drilled into us throughout the whole biochem course, which is that in biology, the shape of molecules decides the function. So form equals function is the phrase that he would use over and over and over again. So here's just the structure of hemoglobin on the left and EGFR on the right. Two completely different proteins. One is transporting iron and oxygen back and forth. The other one is a growth factor receptor on the surface of the cell, bringing in those growth signals and passing it down throughout the cell. Completely different shapes for completely different functions. And the shape of those proteins is what gives them the jobs that they have. It's the same thing in poster presentations. How your poster is designed, what it looks like, also determines how well you can communicate your science. So simply changing how your poster looks, how it's structured, makes a huge difference in sort of the job that you have in communicating your science. These are just some of the technical aspects we'll get into, but there's a lot of sort of design choices here that you can think about to make your poster not just more visually appealing to look at, but also better for communicating your science. Starting with planning. The biggest thing that'll help you in making your poster is planning ahead. I fully admit I am not the best at this. I am one who has procrastinated on posters before. They've gotten done, but it is incredibly stressful trying to make a poster on a short amount of time. So the best thing you can do to get this planned out well, have a well-designed poster, is give yourself plenty of time to make it. Another thing I like doing is drawing out a rough draft of it on a piece of paper. So just grab an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, pen and pencil, and just draw out where you want to put stuff. You're like, okay, I'll put this data here. I'll put my methods and over here, conclusions over here, and just drawing where your information is going to go will give you an idea before you even start playing around in PowerPoint to make the file. As you go through, keep thinking about simplifying the language, proofreading things as you go. Proofreading is huge. You don't want to have to print your poster and then find a typo afterwards. So use that and give yourself time in advance to proofread and edit. And that way you have time to make sure it looks great before you send it off to the printer. So how do you actually make the poster file? The most common program by far that people use to make your poster file is PowerPoint. Doesn't have to be. So Keynote is the Apple version of it. You can do Google Slides. You can do it in Adobe Illustrator. But PowerPoint is just sort of universally the most common software that people use to make your poster presentation slide. In PowerPoint, the interesting thing is that you're not making a standard slide. You're making this single slide at the size that's going to be printed. So I show you here where those buttons are. If you go into the design menu and there's a button there that will say slide size, you will select that and fill in the actual dimensions of your slide. So in the case of most posters, this is 48 inches wide and 36 inches tall. So pick the exact dimensions that you want it to be when you print. And that way, as you're designing this and scaling up images, you can see if your images will be high enough detail to print nicely, or they're going to look fuzzy or grainy on the poster. You'll know that if you're already at 100% scale. A couple other useful tools in PowerPoint. There is a button on there that will make a grid that lays over your slide. And just having that grid as you're going through and lining up bits and pieces, I find is really helpful to make sure that everything is snapping into clean lines. Just having straight lines separating sections, again, just adds a little visual separation between the information. It makes it easier to digest it all. As you're designing your content, you want to stick with the sort of grid layout of starting from top to bottom, left to right, as you read through things. And instead of having everything crammed in there into a giant pile, it organizes things into neat lines that are easy to get through. It's the same idea of making organized queue lines going up to, like a ride at Disney World or something, instead of having a mob of people rushing the door. You want organized lines because you can get through more information faster. So grid lines, if you want to put these visual grid lines, it looks like this while you're designing it. There is a menu there. Just check grid lines. And it's just a nice sort of visual reminder of where everything lines up neatly. However, my favorite buttons, not everyone knows about. If you know about them, great. You can zone out for about a minute. If not, I love these buttons and everyone needs to know about them. And those are the align and group buttons. And that lets you take a lot of objects in PowerPoint and snap them to a true like grid. So you pick up multiple objects, everything moves to line up on the left side or on the top side. So you know you're starting to design this perfect like grid with where everything is. And not just lining up on a grid, there's also buttons here that will distribute horizontally or distribute vertically. This is really nice if you're trying to get, 3 or 4 different boxes in a row, but you can't figure out how much space to put between them. So how you use these buttons is you put your, let's say you're going across the row, you put your object on the left, touching the left edge where you want it to be. Take your object on the right, touching the right object where you want to be. Everything else can be jumbled in the middle. If you highlight everything and hit distribute horizontally, it's going to perfectly space everything out along that line so that there's the same gap between objects. This is a great way to make sure that it just looks visually appealing because the gap between objects is the same for a whole group of objects on there. Margins are another thing that are easy to forget about, but make a huge difference. So for example, this line here, the way I have written the words at this moment, they're all crammed up against each other. There's no separation between lines. They're all the way to the edge of it. Just having the text this dense, looking at this quickly, it's really hard to read it and I like try to get through those lines quickly. But if I take that same information, just add white space between each bullet point, space them out a little bit more, you can now get through that information in a way that you can read quickly, which again is important for a poster. A poster design, as well as it is to think about it, should only be 40% pictures, 20% text, and 20% of the whole thing should be blank space. And it's easy to think, oh, but I'm wasting so much space having all of that empty space in between everything. The empty space is serving a purpose. It is providing gaps between things. It's helping you compartmentalize information in smaller bits and pieces. So you're not trying to shove the entire project into someone's brain at the same time. They can take bites of it. Look at just one figure at a time, see there's a gap between the figures, move on to figure 2. See this gap, move on to figure 3. How that looks on a poster. This is a very basic poster template. Those zones of blue at the top and bottom, the one on top is for your title and affiliations. The one at the bottom might be your references or other acknowledgements. All of those white columns in the middle is where the content is going. So that's your introduction, all of your data, conclusions. What the gray borders are here, though, those are your gaps between everything. Those here is no compete zones. But they're the zones where you should not have any information. There should not be any graphics. It's just empty space between sections so that your brain can segment those into 4 separate columns. You don't necessarily need to do just columns. There are some variations. So this is another common sort of like structure to a slide that you may see on a poster, where there may be one column on the left and then a big section in the middle, or a couple larger sections that take up more space, more than the width of one column. This is really common for certain kinds of plots that have just like absolutely massive like graphs. So a lot of like spatial transcriptomics, a lot of single cell sequencing. You'll see data that just needs a lot of space. This is the way to include that data that needs a lot of space. But the same thing, even with this layout, if it's not in a perfect 4-column layout, 3-column layout, there's still those gray gaps in between each section. Hierarchy is another thing to think about. You'll notice here, it's a little hard to tell, but the main bullet points here are in a font that is larger than the smaller sub bullet points beneath it. And you should use the same thing in your font as well in your poster as you're designing it. So anything that is the main title, titles are bigger font than the content beneath it. If you have multiple bullet points, main bullet points are larger than the sub bullet points beneath it. If your figure has multiple sub figures in it, the heading of each figure, that's the biggest font. And again, it gets smaller as it's less important. So the size of the font tells you how important that piece of information is. Also really important to have just really clean typography. Font choice is something that people shouldn't have to think about in making your poster. You don't want them to pay attention to how the words are laid out or what font it's in. You want them to pay attention to your science and the story you're trying to tell them. So looking at fonts, pick something boring. That is basically the moral story of your font. Pick a boring font. As tempting as it is to pick something fun,
Yeah.
just go for the basics. Something like Helvetica or Arial or Aptos is the new sort of sans serif default that Microsoft uses. Any of those are great. Just a basic sans serif font. You can use serif fonts, so the fonts that have the little like blips on the ends of the letters. You can use those. They're not not as in fashion currently as sans serif fonts are. People just like a clean, simple font. Do not use fancy fonts. They will distract people. If you're using Comic Sans, people are going to be sort of in their brain thinking about the fact that that's written in Comic Sans and not thinking about your science. So don't use any of these fancy fonts. Really keep it simple. So the size of the font. This is another thing that's easy to underestimate the first time you're making a poster. Is the fonts are going to be so much bigger than you expect. This info as well will be on our website.
Okay.
Like how to create a poster. We have these exact same font sizes there. You'll have the slides afterwards too. But yeah, so like your titles are in 80 to 120 point. It looks absolutely ridiculous on your computer screen as you're making it, but I promise when you print it out, it will look normal. So on here, this is going to look weird, but these are the sizes you should be thinking of when you're designing your poster. And again, I'll send you a handout for basically how do you print parts of your poster to 100% scale. If you want to see how big this is, print out part of your poster on regular 8.5 by 11 paper to just see how big that font is. Post it up on the other side of your lab and see if you can read it from 5 to 10 feet away. And you'll see why these big fonts are so important. Same thing with keeping the font simple. You really want to use just one font for your whole poster. So don't use different fonts for different sections. Stick to a single font. Keep it simple so that people pay attention to your science, not to your font choices. You can use different methods for emphasizing certain information. So, important things are in bigger font, but also you can bold certain things or underline certain things. Use it sparingly. Use it like you would use salt on a dish when you're cooking. You want to sprinkle it on top. You're not drowning the whole thing in salt. If you have too much of bolding or underlining, none of it matters. It all just becomes equally important. This is really saving for just like important key phrases. It's also better to use capitalization like you're writing a sentence. So, the first letter of the word is capitalized and then everything else is lowercase after that. Avoid using all caps if you can. In American English, all caps just feels like you're yelling at people. It's not a very friendly way to write. It also does actually take your brain longer to process words in all caps than it does in normal sentence capitalization. So use normal title case font. People will be able to read your poster faster than they would if it was in all caps. Be careful with color. Color can be useful when designing font choices, but keep in mind that certain colors are hard to read in contrast. So anyone who's visually impaired, it's best to have something like black font on a white background, and avoiding red-green color combinations for anyone who's colorblind. So be careful with color, use it sparingly, and be careful of those common pitfalls in colors. Again, like I mentioned, in color, best to use just a plain white background with black font on top of it. It seems like it's a boring design choice, but it's a standard for a reason. It is easy to read, easy to process the information there. If you want to include sort of a little splash of color on your poster, super common to use like a dark color for like the section headings or like borders around certain things. It's best to stick to darker colors, so like jewel tones. So dark blue is the most common by far. I've seen dark red, like a dark emerald green, a dark plum purple, all those usual variations. But darker colors with white font gives the best visual contrast between the headings and the font that you're using. So something dark versus something light. If you're going to fill in certain sections, use solid color fills, don't use gradients. Gradients can be a little hard to read, especially you don't know how the printer you're going to use is going to react to gradients. So just stick to solid background color fills, like a super light blue or super light green in the background. Do not use illustrations. Pictures in the background, again, seems cool in theory. It gets very visually distracting to see a picture behind all your data when the data is what you want to pay attention to. And once again, don't use red-green color combination. If at all possible, avoid that color combination since up to 5 to 10% of the population cannot distinguish those two colors. So pick different colors. So an idea of colors, the top left here is the only color combination on here that would be okay. Don't use something very bright and jarring like this bright yellow or this bright red. Using really sort of aggressive colors like that, again, distracts people from the science. They're now paying attention to the color of your poster and not your actual work. So don't use bright colors like that. Same thing as well with the one at the bottom right. There's this fun picture of DNA in the background. And as cool as it is, it's an awesome graphic. It's distracting from the actual data that should be on top of those sections there. So keep it simple, and then people will understand the science better. Just a couple quick tips for the images. There are some things to think about that you may not think about if you haven't designed a poster before. One of them is that you need to use the highest resolution possible for all images. If it looks okay in small scale, it may not look okay when it's blown up to a much bigger size. And how it scales up really depends on how the file is saved. For anything that is a picture, there are different kinds of picture files. The best one to use by far, if you have the space for it, is a TIFF format. TIFF pictures are the highest quality of like the standard picture qualities you can have. They also take up the most space, so you may have a file that's too big to handle. If that's the case, PNG is the next best. It scales up and down much better. JPEG's the worst. Avoid JPEGs if you can. They do not scale up from small size to big size well. You're gonna have grainy pictures. It's just not gonna look pretty. If you have the option of something that is a pixel-based picture, like TIFF, PNG, JPEG, or if something is vector-based, always take the vector-based art if that is an option. Those are designed in a different way so that they actually can be scaled up and down and they still look sharp even at really large sizes. If you're using any images found online, maybe a publication your lab already has out, so you're using a figure in that to show a method or something like that. Be really careful with images from online since they're often in smaller sizes and sizes that don't scale up and down well. So go to the original source, find the highest quality image you can. Don't stretch or change the proportions to try to make stuff fit. If you stretch things out, it's gonna look unnatural or looks like you did something weird. And you don't want people paying attention to the fact that you stretched an image. You want them to pay attention to the message of the image. So keep this scaling the same. If you need to make it bigger or smaller, do that, but don't stretch it to make it too long or too tall. And once again, posters are big. Posters are really big. The first time you see something printed out, you're like, wow, my immunofluorescence image here is like 2 feet tall. I've never seen this thing before. And it's wild seeing something that big. So it's always a good idea to test print certain sections to make sure that it looks okay when it's printed that big. Logos mentioned at the beginning as well. Keep them simple, just 1 or 2 logos. You really don't need more than that. You don't even have to include a logo if you don't want to. It is optional to have it on your poster. Find a vector art file for a logo. I've included a link here for this basic NaH logo. If you can find a single color version of logos, that's the best. It just keeps, again, the design really simple. So at that link, there's just a white font or a black font version of this NaH logo. So back at the beginning, I showed you my poster from grad school that had way too much information on it. I actually did take the time a couple of years ago to redesign it how I would do it now. To make it look like a better poster. So again, this is version 1. This is what it originally looks like. There's a lot going on here. So from version 1 to version 2, what changes do you see here?
A lot more white space.
A lot more white space. Flip back again. Here's version 1.
I like the borders on the boxes.
Yeah.
It makes it clear it's easier to focus on a single panel.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I added those borders for that exact purpose. You can see there's a separation between the different sections there. A couple other things I changed. I got rid of the abstracts. The old version here has the full abstract. I changed it to an introduction that just has bullet points. So anyone standing there can get through it pretty quickly. I got rid of a lot of the text in the actual figure legends. So instead of having these long legends that spells everything out, it's just the important bits and pieces of information. I also got rid of some of the data. I decided the original poster had too much data, and even still this version, I might get rid of a little bit more. But simplifying it so there's less data there, just makes it easier to get through it quickly. Yeah, so there's all the changes. Almost at the end of time, so just want to wrap up with a couple quick tips on how to present the poster. The biggest part of how you're communicating really comes down to designing the poster, but it's not the whole story. You're still talking to people, and how you talk to them also affects how much information they're going to absorb and if they want to keep that conversation going. Keep in mind as you go through your poster that you want to tell people a story. We are just by humans by nature, we love storytelling. There's a reason why we listen to podcasts and watch TV shows and watch movies and read books, because they're all telling us stories. It's a way not just of being entertained, but also absorbing new information in a much better way than just straight up reading a textbook. Taking people through your poster, you want the way you talk about it to be organized. So talk people through in the order the stuff is presented. So following the exact order of starting with your intro, going through your figures, blah, 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 all the way to the end. And following that same order makes it organized, and they're able to follow where they should be looking next. Keep it short. As you're practicing, especially when there are poster judges, like there will be at Postback Poster Day, and a lot of other presentations as well, there will be poster judges going through bunch of posters all at once, and they have limited time in each poster. So as you're practicing that initial walkthrough of your poster, aim for no longer than 5 minutes. So practice telling people, hey, here's the summary of my poster, walking through in the span of 5 minutes. If you need more time than that, I can promise you there are ways to condense it down. But they will both lose interest and also run out of time. If they have to go run to the next poster, they're not going to have enough time to ask you good follow-up questions or take good notes on what your poster is. So for effective judging and also effective communication and conversations, really keep it to no more than 5 minutes for that initial run through of the poster. And if it's more follow-up questions, fantastic. Then they can ask more questions and keep the convo going. Be excited about your science. I know, especially for the first time, it can be a scary, intimidating thing, especially for our introverts. We love you introverts. We know this is a stretch for you. Think of this instead of being in a giant room full of a bunch of people, you're talking to one person at a time. You're having a one-person conversation with someone about your science. Focus on them. Talk to them like it's just you two in the room. Be excited about what you're doing. You absolutely have been to lectures in the past where the speaker was not enthusiastic about what they're talking about. It's not a fun experience for anyone in the room. Same thing with a poster presentation. You're going to want to talk to someone if they're excited about their work and they want to share it and are passionate about it. Just having that enthusiasm will go a really long way in keeping the conversation going. A good way to think about how you talk about your science that I love using for scientific presentations, whether it's a poster or talk, is what we call the hourglass method. So this is starting with the big picture. Why do we care about your work? What is the big picture? How does this apply to human health? How does this apply to science as a whole? Then you work down to the details of your project. This is the specific problem I am solving or addressing. These are the specific methods I'm using. It gets a lot more technical. After you get into the nitty-gritty details, again, you want to conclude in a big picture. So backing it out again, finding a way to wrap up what you're saying by bringing it back to the beginning of what you said and telling people again why they should care and how this applies to the field more broadly. It's really helpful this way because it keeps people engaged. They have the bits they care about at the beginning and the end. And it also gives you somewhere to conclude. Not having a conclusion statement feels like you're flying a plane and are not going to land the plane immediately. You want somewhere to land the plane. So have a conclusion in mind that keeps the big picture all wrapped up together.
Yeah.
So just last minute tips, be prepared, start this in advance. You need a lot of time to get a poster ready and printed, especially when things go wrong with printing. You want plenty of time for that. Put your viewers first. You want to remember who your audience is. And if you don't know who the audience is, ask them. You're perfectly allowed, in fact, encouraged to ask people what their scientific background is when you're talking to them. Don't read from the poster. It is not engaging to just have someone read it to you. You can stand there and read it yourself. So you're talking to them and telling them a story rather than reading off of what's on the poster. Really important to listen to questions as people ask them. It's easy to sort of assume that a question is going to go one way, but they're asking for something different. If you're not quite sure what they're asking, ask for clarification. Like, oh, did you mean this, or did you want to learn more about this part instead? Totally fine to ask them to clarify what their question means. Also super important, it's okay to admit if you don't know things. So if there's something in there that you don't know the answer to, say, that's a great question. Thanks so much for asking it. We haven't explored this yet, but I would love to talk to you more after this poster presentation to, explore this idea further. So say it politely, thank them for the question, but it's fully okay to say that you don't know something, and it's better to say that than to make up an answer that's wrong. If you have a ton of extra info, when you look supplemental methods, videos sometimes, people will include a QR code that'll link to that extra information online. Absolutely don't have to do that, but it's a nice little bonus if you have like a large data set or a video or something you want to show off as well. Common poster mistakes. So these are mistakes that we actually took from all of the judging comments from the 2024 Postback Poster Day and summarized them down. So great, you've learned everything the judges are going to bring up this year in advance. But the same thing applies not just to Postback Poster Day. These are really common mistakes that we see across all posters that fellows make. Biggest one, by far, the most comments was there was too much text or a wall of text on a poster. People do not want to see too many words. They can't digest it in the amount of time they have. So reduce the amount of text you have. The next biggest problem we saw was people not connecting their project to the broader impact. So how does it connect to big picture human health? How does it connect to science as a whole? If you get too detailed and too technical, it's hard for people to really connect to that story and have a reason to want to keep listening to it. So have that human connection, the reason why they care, throughout how you talk about your science. Point number 3, similar to number 1, they need more pictures or graphs for complex ideas. So reduce the amount of text you have, bring in things like graphical abstracts, using BioRender, using BioArt. Pictures are your friend. Graphs not labeled properly, people forgetting to label axes or having the font so small you can't read the axes. Another common problem is people skipping over the introduction. So don't forget to give that basic background, especially for people who are not in your same field, not in the same kind of science you do. They need that background information to know how to follow along with the story. Text too small, so just be careful of fonts being too small. You can't read it from a distance. Too much jargon and acronyms. So really important if you have a lot of like acronyms that you use to shorten things, spell out as many acronyms as you can. Avoid them because people will not recognize the acronyms. Even if you spell it out once, they may scan over the poster quickly and not realize you spelled that once, but not elsewhere in the poster. So spell out acronyms everywhere you can. Just quickly to go through points for how to print your poster. If you're in PowerPoint, go to print and then Microsoft Print to PDF. You want to print it as a PDF. It's the best way to scale it up to size and make sure everything stays in the right place. You're printing it as a high quality full page slide. Do not select scale to fit paper, or it's going to scale it down to like an 8.5 by 11, or it's going to shrink it to just a weird size. And don't check that. Where to print your poster. There are places at NIH you can print posters. OITE is not one of them. So as much as we wish we could help, we do not have a poster printer. But talk to your PI now. There is often poster printers available to ICs or certain labs or departments that they have their own poster printer that you can use either for free or you can charge to the lab funds using what's called a CAN number. But ask your PI where they normally print and how they pay for it, because that makes a difference. Even if there are places on campus, they're not necessarily free, so you need to know how to pay for it with lab funds and if your PI is okay with using that method. 2 places on campus that you can go. The Clinical Center Information Technology Center can print posters in advance. Their slots are filling up quickly, so if you're going to use them, you need to do it in the next couple weeks. NIH Medical Arts is another really common place to print posters. You can submit on their website or email them. That's on the next slide. They are currently very short-staffed, so if you are going to print with them, you must get your poster to them 2 weeks before the event, or they cannot guarantee it's going to be printed in time. This used to be a 3-day turnaround. This year, they're asking for a 2-week turnaround time. So for April 30th, Postback Poster Day, you must get your poster to them by April 16th to guarantee it'll be printed in time. Medical arts, this will be in the slides afterwards. That's just how to get in contact with them and print your poster with them. Yeah, tips before this, we talked about it. The big thing is remember to have fun. This is, it's a lot of work going into this, but this really is the time for you to show off everything that you have done over the past couple of years. Really show off the science to other people, connect with other people, make those new networking connections beyond just the science as well. Poster sessions are chaotic, but they're also really, really fun. So don't forget to enjoy that time. That's the end of the presentation. Now we're a little over time, but I will stick around and answer questions for a bit if anyone has questions. Folks in person, since you're here in person, you get first dibs if you have any questions.
Oh, anyone online can go. I have a few.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's see. We use figures generated with Prism or other software in PowerPoint. The results sometimes will get pixelated due to scaling when printed on posters. Is there a good way to maintain the figure quality to avoid pixelation? Yes, so the kind of file you save a figure as will make a difference. If you can save it as a scalable version, coming from GraphPad Prism, you can save it, I think, as an SVG, or a PNG is another one that will scale up and down well. So a TIFF or a PNG will give you a higher quality. Do not save it as a JPEG. JPEG will not look nice. But yeah, so there are settings in how you save the file that you want it to be the highest quality possible. And if they give you a vector form, you want to save the figure as a vector instead of as a pixelated form. Could you present data that is just published? Absolutely. On a poster, you can absolutely include data that is already published. And in fact, that's probably the most common kind of data is data that's either just about to be published or was just published in the past few months. So new data is what people get excited about, and data that has just been published is great to present. Even if it has been published, still talk to your PI before you put it on a poster, just to clear it with them. It is always important to talk to your PI in advance first. I haven't the chance so far. What do you have?
Oh, so this is really specific for my project, but I do basic research with Drosophila. And especially at the NIH, there's a lot of context and background information that I need to provide
Yes.
before I even get to framing the question of the context. And so I'm wondering how to handle that, or I guess like a specific question I have is I'm someone who I would rather you understand it 75% using some random analogy.
Yep.
But I know that some scientists don't like that. And they don't like they see it as sort of like patronizing and that I'm like dumbing it down and when I'm just trying to communicate effectively. So I guess specifically for Postback Poster Day, what is the vibe and how should I how should I go about that?
Vibe, I think in general, I think analogies are great. I think it's a super smart way to summarize really complex ideas in a short amount of time. So keep doing that. I think that's a great way to talk about your science. Postback Poster Day in particular, because it's people from all of the ICs, they're from all over NIH. Scientific backgrounds are super varied.
20 something, I don't know, it's that number.
It'll be close to 1,000 posters.
Oh, wow.
And then each poster, I think you get like 4 judges. So like you're getting people from all over NIH.
Okay.
Yep. So absolutely like big picture using analogies. That's a great way to do it. And again, asking someone upfront what their scientific background is helps a lot. So if they say they're a Drosophila genetics person, you can be like, oh, great, so I can go into detail. I don't need the analogies for you. I can go straight into the more technical stuff. So just knowing their background when you start would help a lot with that framing too.
Okay. And then we were talking about like larger connections to human health, especially at the NIH. Should that be explicit on the poster or is it okay?
Yes. Doesn't have to be a ton, but a bullet point in your introduction goes a long way. Especially for yours, for like people who are not Drosophila people. Like, why do I care about Drosophila? Like if you tell them like this is how Drosophila models this disease or this organ system well, yes, then they'll have something to connect to.
Okay.
Yes, we will be sharing these slides afterwards. So anyone who is here today, I'll be sending you the recording and the slides later. Last call for questions. Anything else? Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I hope this was a useful overview of things to think about when designing your poster. If you have any questions as you're getting stuff ready for post-back poster day, absolutely feel free to reach out to us. We'll either have answers for you or know who to point you to. But best of luck with designing all of your posters. Don't forget to start early. Take plenty of time to print them out in case stuff goes wrong in printing. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing everyone present on April 30th. Have a good one.